Good evening from Westminster, where MPs today demanded the immediate recall of Parliament following a landmark ruling by Scotland's highest civil court. The Court of Session in Edinburgh ruled that the Prime Minister's decision to suspend the ruling for 5 weeks was unlawful. They said they were unanimous in their belief that Boris Johnson had been motivated by the improper purpose of stymying Parliament. And the case now goes to the UK Supreme Court next week. Downing Street said it was disappointed by the ruling and that the prorogation of Parliament had been legal and necessary. Our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, reports now on today's ruling and its implications.
Judgment Day. In Scotland's Court of Session, a clear verdict on Boris Johnson.
Each opinion expresses the view that the advice given by the Government to Her Majesty the Queen to prorogue Parliament from 9th September to 14th October was unlawful, and that therefore the prorogation itself is unlawful.
In plain language, the judges concluded Number 10 broke the law by telling the Queen they wanted to suspend Parliament for a break before unveiling their plans for government. And opposition MPs, jubilant at the ruling, suspected in fact they wanted to close down Parliament to avoid difficult questions on Brexit.
For every moment Parliament remains prorogued, the British government are breaking the law. So we, as politicians, are calling for Parliament to be recalled so that we can get on with scrutinising what this government is up to in relation to Brexit.
The court did not specifically order the government to open up the Commons, but some MPs who'd packed up just yesterday rushed back to demand it gets going again, taking their places in protest on the green benches in the empty chamber, with an impromptu rally at the doors.
We have shown in the last 10 days that we are prepared to work together across parties in the national interest, and our resolve remains absolutely firm that we will do that.
What do you actually propose to do now? Are you all going to stay here in the Palace of Westminster? Are you going to go and sit in the chamber?
We're going to go back into the building. We've all got jobs to be doing. We've got meetings to be taking place. We've all got constituents to be representing. And ultimately, we will find other ways of holding this government to account.
Labour, too, is pressing the Prime Minister for a return.
Whatever happens next week, we will continue to press for Parliament to be recalled so that we can question the Prime Minister.
Hang on, though. Scottish law is different to English law, and the High Court in London reached the opposite conclusion in a similar case brought by the businesswoman Gina Miller just days ago, deciding the Prime Minister's decision to close the Commons was actually none of the court's business.
Number 10 will appeal. A final verdict will be given by the UK Supreme Court next Tuesday. But this is as extraordinary as it is serious. The Prime Minister's actions are found to have been against the law. Downing Street ruled to have misled the Queen. Less than 2 months into office, Boris Johnson has hurtled into a genuine constitutional clash.
Number 10 denied they'd suggested the Scottish judges had been somehow biased. And for now, Cabinet Ministers are reluctant to be drawn into the tangle.
I'm not going to comment on an ongoing legislative process. It's a judicial issue and no doubt it will be appealed to the Supreme Court.
Government insiders are curiously relaxed about the ruling. And some MPs and ministers reckon they'll still have many of the public on their side.
The government have acted legally, constitutionally and in normality. Farcical? Absolutely and completely. Not for the government, for the whole place. The fact of the matter is the people said we want to leave the European Union and this place says we don't.
That frustration is what Downing Street's banking on. A serious and important defeat in court for them today. But it seems lining up to take on Parliament is almost part of their ruthless approach. Laura Kuenssberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as we heard, today's ruling in Scotland in the Court of Session also goes against the ruling of the High Court in London last week, which decided that this was a political matter and not a matter for the judges. Our legal correspondent, Clare Coleman, explains the legal case and what's going to happen next.
Two courts considering a point of massive national and constitutional importance and coming to two completely different conclusions. Scotland's highest civil court ruled that Boris Johnson's advice to the Queen to suspend, known as proroguing Parliament, was unlawful because it stymied parliamentary scrutiny. That's because Parliament's role in scrutinising the government is a central pillar of our constitution, which the Scottish judges said followed naturally from the principles of democracy and the rule of law. But the High Court here in London says that advice given by the Prime Minister to the Queen to suspend Parliament is political, not legal. And that's something the government's been arguing from the get-go. The judges here say it's not a proper matter to be brought before the courts because there are no legal standards against which to judge it. But the Scottish court is an appeal court, so its ruling outranks the High Court. But now both cases are hurtling here to the highest court in the land, the UK Supreme Court, where in a hearing set to start on Tuesday, the contradiction between those two judgments will be resolved. And there'll be a definitive ruling on whether the Prime Minister Boris Johnson acted unlawfully or not. And that will determine whether MPs and Parliament sit in the lead up to the UK leaving the EU. And that's really our constitution in action. Independent judges acting through the mechanism of judicial review can halt the might of government in its tracks if what ministers have done is unlawful. Because as the lawyers like to say, be you ever so mighty, the law is above you.
Well, that was Clare Coleman there with his assessment of the legal process. Let's talk to our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, who's at the Court of Session in Edinburgh. And some more detail then, Sarah, about this highly significant ruling that was passed by the judges today.
Yeah, it's fascinating to look at exactly what the three judges at the Court of Session actually had to say in their ruling, because whilst it doesn't explicitly say that Boris Johnson has either lied to the Queen or tried to mislead voters, if you drill down into the complex legal jargon, you'll see that is pretty much exactly what they're saying. Boris Johnson has always maintained it is perfectly normal for a new government to prorogue Parliament and that it's nonsense to suggest that he's trying to undermine democracy. Well, today, the three judges in the Court of Session basically said that they didn't believe him and that they think he is trying to avoid parliamentary scrutiny in the run-up to the UK leaving the EU. They were unanimous in their finding that he was motivated by, and I'll quote from their ruling here, the improper purpose of stymying Parliament. And that's the reason that they found that he was acting unlawfully. One of the three judges here at the Court of Session even went on to say that Boris Johnson was motivated by, and I'll quote again, an egregious case of a clear failure to comply with generally accepted standards of behaviour of public authorities. So in essence, what you've got is three really senior judges saying they don't believe the Prime Minister's reasons for why he wanted to suspend Parliament and that they think he did mislead the Queen when he asked her to prorogue Parliament.
Sarah, once again, thank you very much for more detail there on the ruling. Sarah Smith, our Scotland editor in Edinburgh. Well, the government has tonight published documents relating to Operation Yellowhammer. That's the contingency plan in case the UK leaves the European Union without a deal. MPs demanded the release of these documents last week, and our economics editor Faisal Islam is with me. He's been looking at them. What are the main points, Faisal?
Well, these are quite sobering few pages for the government, but also for viewers at home that can now read this. The core of this that shows potential impacts of a worst-case no deal across sectors is the assumptions about the flow of traffic through the Channel Tunnel and between Dover and Calais, and that about half of that traffic, over half that traffic, won't flow. That has knock-on impact on food, for example. Certain types of fresh food supply will decrease, will reduce availability and choice of products, and will increase price. Low-income groups will be disproportionately affected by any price rises, but they do say there won't be an overall impact on food supply. On the issue of fuel, that regional traffic disruption stretched back to the M25 in Kent could cause border delays, could affect fuel distribution, and which would disrupt fuel supply in London and in the southeast. And then perhaps surprisingly on the issue of social care, an increase in inflation following EU exit would significantly impact social care providers due to increasing staff and supply costs and may lead to provider failure. That's just three areas, many other sectors impacted.
So now that this is out in the open, after MPs demanded it, how is the government responding? Is it playing down the impact or what?
Well, originally they did play it down. They said it was an old document. Number 10 sources suggested that it was leaked by older cabinet ministers. The date on this document is very clearly August the 2nd. So when it was first percolated out there, that will have only been a couple of weeks old. It's only 5 weeks old. Government does argue that they have made some progress, but this is the latest iteration of the reasonable worst case assumptions. Should be said that I have been told that there was a version of this document that was entitled base case scenario. The government says that that is a technical explanation of something more wide. But there's also very concerning assumptions about Northern Ireland, disruption to key sectors and job losses likely to result, protests and direct action with road blockages, particularly severe in border communities. Very serious for the government, but also now out in the open.
Faisal, once again, thanks very much. Faisal Islam there, our economics editor, with detail from that Operation Yellowhammer document. Well, while the government's parliamentary strategy is being questioned by the courts, Labour's policy on Brexit is also under increased scrutiny. With divisions at senior levels of the party, the leader, Jeremy Corbyn, was forced to dismiss calls from his deputy, Tom Watson, for another EU referendum before any general election. Our deputy political editor, John Pienaar, looks at the Brexit tensions within the Labour Party.
Their leader and deputy of the same party, though today you'd hardly know it, Jeremy Corbyn, keeping open the question, does Labour back leave or remain? And Tom Watson facing the other way. Today, unlike his leader, he wanted another referendum before the election and a campaign to stay in, his way to win back lost supporters at election time.
They just want us to take an unequivocal position that whatever happens, we'll fight to remain and to sound like we mean it. And if we did, we could win. Whereas if we don't, I fear we won't.
Mr Corbyn doesn't want to upset Leave or Remain voters, even if that upsets his deputy.
It's Tom's view. I don't accept it and I don't agree with it. Our priority is to get a general election in order to give the people a chance to elect a government that cares for them, not themselves.
At the TUC in Brighton, Mr Corbyn's gathered support among union leaders. His biggest supporters' counter-strike at Tom Watson wasn't just political, it was personal.
Now and again, Tom pops up from wherever he's been hiding and comes up with something. Instead of supporting his leader, it's normally to try and undermine him. And I don't know why he does it. Less and less people listen to him. If he wants to continue to languish on the fringes of the Labour Party, that's up to him. But his views don't really matter anymore.
Yet many of Mr Corbyn's previously uncritical supporters want Labour to come out as an anti-Brexit party. No ifs, no buts. Privately, his inner circle see Tom Watson as a political enemy posing as a loyal colleague. Yet this rift mirrors a broader split between the leader and many of the party's members in the country. In Leeds North West, Labour's main challenger are the anti-Brexit Lib Dems. Could clearer support for staying in the EU help win over and win back voters?
Hopefully, yeah. I'd like to think it would. I think there's a lot of people that were misinformed, and I think now with everything that's happened with Brexit, I think it's time that, yeah, I think we should remain.
I think it would be welcomed.
Why?
I think there's a feeling that we're proud to be European.
I normally vote Labour, but at this time I will vote for either Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson, or whoever wants to get us out of Europe, because Watson and Jeremy Corbyn are just useless. They do not believe in democracy or the will of the people.
Jeremy Corbyn may well get his way in this struggle, but Labour's annual conference is just over a week away, and the strains will be on show. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, during the day, the Brexit Party leader, Nigel Farage, offered an electoral deal with the Conservatives, which would see the parties agreeing not to stand against each other in dozens of seats at a general election, so that support for Brexit wasn't diluted. Number 10 has dismissed the idea, but Mr Farage insists it could work and it would lead to the defeat of Labour. Our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth, was at this evening's Brexit Party rally in Sedgefield. There is some flash photography in the report.
Look who's gearing up for a campaign. Tonight, Nigel Farage was targeting Labour voters in the North East, trying to win over disillusioned Leavers.
We are in an all-out political war with the Labour Party.
He says neither main party can be trusted with Brexit, yet today he offered the Tories a pact. If they give the Brexit Party a clear run in Labour areas, his party will stand aside in Tory strongholds. Number 10, though, said he's not fit and proper to be allowed near government.
The whole point of this non-aggression pact is that Boris Johnson wins a big majority, beats the Labour Party, gets a proper clean Brexit delivered.
But that doesn't change the fact number 10 has effectively said no chance.
Well, if number 10 says no chance, then one thing is very, very clear. Number 10 will not win a majority in the election.
Number 10 might disagree, but this party has quickly attracted support from Brexit backers.
The Brexit Party has got more of a chance than any other party of actually getting us out of Europe.
I'm from a mining town, and ultimately Conservatives don't stand a chance there.
But support for Nigel Farage hasn't easily translated into Westminster seats. He himself has never won one. Much will depend on the timing of the election. If we've left the EU, it could kill this party's key message. If not, they could take crucial votes from Labour and the Tories. Stockton South is the kind of marginal seat the Conservatives need for an election victory. Most people here opted to leave, so if the Brexit Party stand, they could eat into Tory support. But at this fashion shop in the High Street, owner Alison, who did vote leave, isn't convinced.
What do you think about Nigel Farage and his Brexit Party? Would you ever consider voting for them?
No.
No?
No.
What would put you off?
Well, I think him himself puts me off.
At a nearby deli, Joe and Van are both Leave voters.
The thing you've got to ask yourself is what policies do the Brexit Party have other than Brexit? And once that's happened, they then become a little bit redundant.
I agree with a lot with what Nigel Farage says, but I'm just not sure I would vote that way.
What would stop you?
I just don't think they're ready to take on to run the country. If they were going to go in hand with the Conservatives, possibility.
But with their offer refused, that seems a way off, and the race still on to win round Brexit backers. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Sedgefield.
So after such a momentous and eventful day in this very bumpy Brexit process, John Pienaar is with me, our Deputy Political Editor. Let's ask the direct question, John, after today's events. Where does it leave the Prime Minister?
Well, Hugh, it leaves Boris Johnson in strange, unexplored territory. It's been extraordinary to see a Conservative Prime Minister, historically a defender of British institutions, an upholder of the rule of law, found by a senior court to have used false arguments to shut down Parliament. A Brexiteer minister this evening pointedly suggested that many people would doubt the impartiality of those judges, though, by the way, the Justice Secretary has rebutted that whole idea. It's true, as we saw in my report, there are tensions high up in the Labour Party. But it's striking that some of those closest to Boris Johnson believe that the tensions and strains that have torn at British politics and public life could work in Boris Johnson's favour, help him present himself as on the side of the people against all comers in favour of Brexit. And that means against Parliament, the courts, the whole establishment. It's an extraordinary position for the Prime Minister to be in, and it's worth just looking briefly at the cost or potential cost of all of this. Faisal discussed the Yellowhammer Papers. A government source has been saying to me this evening, look, these are worst case scenarios, and based on out-of-date information, there'd be an update soon. But if any part of this was a real risk, and it's admitted that it could be, people will ask, many will ask, how can it be right in principle to shut Parliament for 5 weeks? And whatever happens in the Supreme Court next week, whatever happens to Brexit or the election that's coming, or maybe a conceivable election soon, the splits in this country that have torn Britain from top to bottom cannot heal anytime soon.
John, again, thanks very much. John Pienaar there, our Deputy Political Editor, with his analysis after this rather significant day. And that's it from Westminster tonight. In just a few days' time, the UK Supreme Court, not far from here, will make a vitally important ruling on whether these Houses of Parliament were suspended lawfully or not.